Spotlighting Hawaii's leaders.
We want to bring in Governor David Ige.
Good morning, Mr. Mayor.
Lieutenant Governor, good morning. Thanks so much for joining us. Mayor Derek Kawakami.
Thank you so much, Senator, for being here.
Spotlighting the issues.
Where is the virus right now in our community?
How much is this overall going to cost the state?
How are you responding to the community's concerns? Talk about the level of citations that you guys are writing.
Spotlight Hawaii with Yanji Denise and Ryan Kalei Suji on the digital platforms of the Honolulu Star-Advertiser.
This episode of Spotlight Hawaii is brought to you by Longstrugs.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks so much for tuning in here on this Monday morning and starting your week out with us. I'm Ryan Kalei Suji, joined by Yanji Denise, and this is Spotlight Hawaii on the digital platforms of the Honolulu Star-Advertiser. This morning, we dive deeper into the water issues surrounding Red Hill, and we catch up with someone who has been quite busy over the past few months, Yanji.
That's right. A very popular guest on our program. We welcome Board of Water Supply Chief Engineer Ernie Lau this morning. Ernie, thanks for being here.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Well, let's start with the basics. The Navy has agreed to, the Pentagon rather, to drain the tanks. What is that process looking like at this point? We know that there had been some reservations early on whether draining them could cause more leaks and more issues in the short term. What are we looking at right now when it comes to the actual draining of those tanks?
I want to acknowledge Defense Secretary Austin's decision in his memo of March 7th to defuel and permanently shut down the facility. The timeline, it looks like, based on that memo, is the Navy has up to May 31st to come up with a plan on defueling. And then when the facility is deemed safe for defueling, then they have 12 months after that to actually empty out the tanks and the pipelines.
And when we look at that process, when, as you say, they have till May to kind of put this plan together, is that something that they're working on solely by themselves, or is that something that they're working with the state or working with you folks on to get your thoughts, or is this kind of all in their purview and control?
I think it's all in their purview and control. They're not working. They haven't consulted with the Board of Water Supply. I'm not sure if they have had discussions with the Department of Health on this process. But I think you raise an important point. So once the plan is developed end of May, I think that plan should be shared broadly to us and also to the community. We would be glad to provide our suggestions or our comments on that plan. And then I think the progress on the defueling and the permanent shutdown, that should be also updated. That update should go to the whole community and to us.
In the meantime, of course, we have the issue of where the fuel came from and how far it's migrated through the valley. Do you have any more clarity on that right now?
Yanji, unfortunately, I don't have more clarity on that. I believe they have found fuel in different monitor wells. They've been drilling some new ones, and I think they're hitting fuel. But that information is right now it's just secondhand. We haven't seen the actual data. So the investigation, likewise, with the fuel defueling of the facility, the fuel tanks and the pipes, the investigation to the aquifer contamination, the nature and extent of the contamination in the groundwater, that should also be, I think, very public and transparent to the community. We think it's important because this is a public trust resource. And we all own this resource. This is for the people of Hawaii.
Speaking of transparency, one of the things that you were calling for on the last time we spoke was access to a report that was, heavily redacted with a lot of information missing. You had noted that if you had the opportunity to review all the information on there, it would help you folks get a better assessment of how widespread this was and allow you folks to make more decisions moving forward. Have you received that report, and have you heard anything back from the Navy on that?
No, we haven't seen that report. There's now actually two reports. There was the report that Admiral Paparo, the head of Pacific Fleet, the U.S. Pacific Fleet, that was due mid-January. And I think the commitment of the Navy was to release that unredacted when that report was done. Then a assistant chief of naval operations ordered a supplemental report to be done So that also has no timeline on it. We haven't seen any of that. I think it's important to understand what was the situation that created the problem we're currently dealing with. But it's also important to remember that this facility has been around for about 79 years. And in its history, there's maybe over 180 million gallons or 180,000 gallons or more of fuel leaks in the past. So how does that all play together?
In the meantime, you've had to shut down 3 wells, and that has grave consequences for our community. How long are you expecting to have to shut down those wells, or should we basically write them off and expect them to stay shut down for good?
Right now, I would say it's indefinite. It's subject really to finding out exactly if fuel is moving across the valley. Will it get to Halawa Shaft, our AL wells, Halawa wells, if we turn them back on? What assurances we have that that won't happen? In the meantime, because it's indefinitely shut down, we're proceeding to look for new wells to replace the capacity we've lost. Right now, between the 3 wells, I think we're looking at about 17.5 million gallons a day of well capacity that is no longer available to our community.
And when you say that number, I mean, 17.5 million, I mean, that just seems like a lot to have to replace. Where, how does that process even look like? Do you know that there are other aquifers? I mean, what are the chances and likelihood that you'll be able to find something that's able to match what is currently out of service, essentially?
Ryan, all we can do is in that immediate area, outside of the potential influence from any kind of fuel contamination from the Red Hill facility, we're looking at sites for new exploratory wells. And until we actually drill and test those wells, we won't be sure of the quantity of water that's available, also the quality of the water, if it's suitable for drinking. So right now we've identified about 6 potential locations as our first batch of wells to be drilled and tested.
17.5 million, I believe, is what you said, gallons per day. Can you give us some context for that? How much of our overall water usage does that represent? And in the meantime, as you search those wells that Ryan had asked about, how do we make that up if we don't have access to new water?
Okay, so the capacity impacts to our water system. So for Halawa Shaft is the primary, one of our large sources serving urban Honolulu from Halawa area all the way out to Hawaii Kai. That's about 20% of the supply. For the smaller system serving the Aiea Halawa area along the lower elevations, that's along Cam Highway, going from Iwa Ina Street and Halawa Business Park all the way to westward to Hikaha Street, Waimalu Street. That's about 50% of the supply capacity that's no longer available. So we have to make that up on both systems. And the total pumping capacity we're looking at is around 17.5 million gallons a day of capacity. One thing I've been saying this, you can't really drill a well and test it and construct a permanent well facility there. It doesn't happen in a year. Typically, our experience has been in the 5 to 7 year range that we actually take to develop a replacement well.
So with 5 to 7 years, I mean, we're looking at a long process here to, let's say these 3 sources do not come back online and having to replace that quantity and knowing the timetable it takes to find these new ones. This could take some time and something that you folks will be having to deal with for quite a number of years moving forward. How do you as a department plan for something like that?
It's a very challenging situation. I don't think we've been in this situation ever before, where we lost that much capacity in such a short time. We're going to need the cooperation of all our customers to save water. We know that over time, people can use less water through water conservation, more efficient water devices like toilets, shower heads, that water use can actually come down even though the population continues to grow and new projects get built. So the challenge is, can we conserve at the same time and reduce our water usage while we're trying to develop more source capacity to make up what we've lost? it is going to be very challenging right now. I wish I had a simple answer for people, but I just want to kind of manage people's expectations. Right now, we're going to be in this crisis situation for multiple years. Rather than, the question was asked earlier about when can we turn Halawa Shaft on? And I mentioned about the need for investigation into the contamination of the aquifer. That investigation itself could take a few years to occur before we know enough about what's happening underground. Rather than waiting for that investigation to be completed and then start pursuing new wells, we've decided to actually do things in parallel. Look for new wells while that investigation goes on. And that way we're not wasting any time.
We have the situation on this island and other islands, but especially here in urban Honolulu, of a lack of affordable housing. And there are a number of people who have called for a lot more construction projects, building tens of thousands of units to meet demand. Construction projects like that use a lot of water and create condos or apartments or what have you, homes that then use a lot of water once they're built. What do you think the impact will be long-term for construction projects? Do you foresee having to perhaps elevate some projects and deny permits to others? Or how do you navigate that part of this crisis?
We haven't made any decision how to approach that. And it's going to involve the Board of Water Supply, the 7-member board in that decision. Some of the challenges are, do you treat one group, or say if it was an affordable housing project, differently from another development that maybe was not affordable housing, it was commercial or market rentals or market homes? How do you treat them differently? That is something I don't have the answer right now. And what we see, the push for affordable housing, for more housing units, and rightfully so, we face some of the highest costs per house in the nation, and we need more supply. But right now, building that supply in the urban Honolulu area, in the water system that's impacted by this, and in that Aiea Halawa system, is going to put a lot of stress on a system that's already deficient in supply. But there are other areas of the island that development can occur without the challenges we're facing here. Because not all of our water systems island-wide are impacted, just these 2 water systems. So I don't know the answer right now, Yunji and Ryan.
There has been a lot of discussion, and we've talked to other leaders in our community about this, about the price tag of who is paying for the development and the research for these new wells and potential sources of water. What are your thoughts on this? I mean, we've heard from members, as I said, leaders who say that is ultimately the military should be responsible for paying that bill. How do you manage that moving forward with the costs that are going to be associated with this?
So one thing to remember is that the Board of Water Supply, we're financially self-sufficient. So people paying their water bills it's how we pay for the operation of the water system throughout the year, and also the capital expansion or replacement of aging pipelines and infrastructure that we need to continually invest in. That basically comes from people paying their water bills. Now we have this situation where we're facing additional costs because of the fuel contamination issue created by the Navy at Red Hill. We believe that cost ultimately should be borne by the federal government. The problem was created by them. There was adequate, I think, warning to them over many, many years that they knew they had problems there. And we've, at least for the last 8 years, have been advocating for protection of the water resources, preventing what the disaster we're kind of in right now. Unfortunately, that didn't happen. Ultimately, they should be responsible for costs that are related to dealing with the effects of Red Hill contamination issues. We've actually written to our congressional delegation formally to ask their kokua in helping to make sure that Congress is going to fund reimbursement of the BWS and our ratepayers of the cost.
I want to go back to construction for just 1 second and ask you about issuing permits and green lighting construction projects. Do you anticipate a time where you will have to put a halt to that, or put a moratorium or a pause in some areas, perhaps to encourage construction like you're talking about that would take advantage of other water systems? Or, where are we on that?
Right now, we're still in we're trying to get the information on what projects are coming. We know that there are some already in construction. You can look around Honolulu and you see these tower cranes for high-rise housing projects. And we're trying to do that same analysis both in Aiea and Halawa area and also Honolulu. But we don't at this time feel comfortable, I think, making a recommendation to the board yet for a building moratorium or a restriction of water meters going out for new construction. But we're gonna approach that, I think, in the summer and see how difficult it is to meet the demand of our customers in the summer when the demand is the highest. And at that point, we will probably be making some recommendations to the board. But I don't want to create panic among the developers. We are responding to their early questions about availability of water supply in Honolulu and the Aiea Halawa system. We're at this point on those early inquiries, we're saying we're unable to determine if its system is adequate at this time. It's always determined at the time of building permit application. But that's the situation right now. We're going to the board this afternoon to talk about a water shortage plan with triggers that would, based on pump operation, hours of pump operation during the day. And we'll see what kind of feedback we get from the board, and we'll refine and finalize that plan with their feedback. The triggers are based on how many hours during the day the well pump has to run. The maximum it can run is 24 hours a day to try to keep up with the daily water demand. If the daily water demand is greater than what all our remaining wells that can still pump, operating up to 24 hours a day, if the demand for water is greater, then some of our customers will run out of water in different parts of the system. And that's what we're trying to avoid. So we have triggers. We try to keep it around 16 hours a day. We have to run these pumps with adequate standby wells that are backup wells. Then if it gets to 20 hours, we move into a alert condition. And if it gets to 22 hours where the pumps are running at 22 hours a day, then we're what we're here is the critical condition. And that's kind of the warning sign that we're facing a situation we may run out of water in the near future.
You've asked residents to conserve water and to begin that process of just taking small steps to see what they can do to help in this process. Have you seen any noticeable differences since you've put out that call? Has there been a response from the community? Have you seen the water levels going down?
We have on our website, go to boardofwatersupply.com or another site called protectoahuwater.org. And we have graphs showing the island-wide pumping each week, and also the pumping within the Honolulu system and the Aiea Halawa system. So you'll see in that graph that it does fluctuate, but unfortunately, since about January, the trend is still upwards. And more recently, I pray for rain, and I was glad. I don't mind walking my dog in the rain, and because I know that rain helps to recharge our aquifer, but it also helped to bring water use down. So I think more in the last week or so, we saw some decrease in water usage, at least in Honolulu and Aiea. But unfortunately, the rains have been kind of light, and they're not. If this trend can continue for a few more months of getting more rainfall, then I think that'll be helpful. But right now, unfortunately, looking at since January, the trend is still this way. And we're not even into summer yet.
One way to force people to use less water, of course, is to charge more for it. Are you looking at rate increases anytime soon? And if so, what would those look like?
We are starting the process to do a rate study because, like I mentioned earlier, Board of Water Supply, we're financially self-sufficient. So we have to ensure that rates are adequate to pay for the operation and maintenance of the water system, and also the replacement of our infrastructure and expansion of our capacity. So that we're looking at doing a rate study for the next 5 years. But we always balance that with issues of affordability, trying to keep rates affordable for our customers. So that is kind of the balancing act between the two. Now superimpose on top of that the additional costs of dealing with the Red Hill situation. And for now, for the near term, basically we're all, as water customers, I'm a BWS water customer, we're going to have to pay that cost. And then at the same time, we're going to seek reimbursement from the federal government. But I know that process of reimbursement probably will not be a quick one. But we can't wait to start the action to look for new wells to make improvements to our water system. We have to start now.
Just to follow on that, how significant of an increase could we see, given that I'm sure that those projects are significant?
I can't tell you at this point, Yunji, until we do the analysis. It starts off with a cost of service analysis to see what the actual cost it is to provide service to our single-family residential customers, our multi-unit residential customers, our non-residential customers, our farmers. So we do the cost of service analysis. The other thing that we're looking at, when we look at paying for especially the expansion and improvement of our infrastructure, we also are borrowing. Instead of using cash to pay for all of that, which is the most expensive approach, it's called what the pay-as-you-go approach. So our existing ratepayers would pay all the costs to expand and replace the aging infrastructure. We balance that with actually borrowing money by floating revenue bonds, selling revenue bonds. We can spread that cost over 20 or 30 years. So it's not only the existing customers today that pay for the full cost of that CIP or the capital improvement program. We kind of spread it out over customers over 20 or 30 years. So we just finished a bond sale of $135 million, revenue bond sale. And we had some good rates as a part of that sale. We just made it in time before the market's kind of been a little crazy right now, especially with the war in Ukraine.
I want to bring in a question here from a viewer who's asking, is there a plan to change out all the old water main pipes before they break and exacerbate the water shortage? Simultaneously with dealing with this crisis, we know that the Board of Water Supply has had issues with water main breaks and trying to update and repair the infrastructure. If you can update us on how all of this impacts those types of progress.
Yeah, so our plan, based on our water master plan that was adopted in 2016 by the board, is to ramp up our replacement of our water mains. We have island-wide about 2,100 miles of water mains. Some of the oldest water mains are like in Honolulu, over 100 years old. So our plan is to ramp up to replacing up to 21 miles of the water mains each year, about 1% of our water mains. So that'll help to bring our main breaks down, not immediately, the number of main breaks each year, but over time, the number of main breaks should come down. The other thing that we're doing to try to address the pipelines that are leaking or breaking is to actually do leak detection, to go out and proactively try to find a leak on a water main before it becomes a big main break. So what we've been leveraging in the last few years is actually using satellite technology to use a satellite to scan the island of Oahu and look for areas within our water system that they can detect chlorinated water. And from that, we've been able to actually become much more efficient in finding and repairing leaks. So it's been a good use of technology. It's something that I never even thought of, using a satellite in space to be able to see chlorinated water on the ground that might be from a leak.
Former Honolulu Mayor Kurt Caldwell, who's running for governor, was on this program on Friday. We asked his thoughts on this crisis. And one of the things he raised, which I hadn't heard widely discussed yet, is the idea of having the Navy build a desalination plant to kind of offset some of the water that we're missing. Is that something that you think is feasible? Is that something that you think should be pursued? That, he was likening it to communities in the Middle East who rely on that kind of water.
Actually, funny you should ask that question, because we actually have a project that's going through a procurement process right now for a seawater desalination plant in Kalailoa. It starts off at about 1.7 million gallons a day capacity, and then eventually be able to expand up to 5 million gallons a day production capacity. This project is going to be hopefully 25% funded using federal funds from the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation. Thanks to former Senator Inouye, many years ago, he got it passed in law that this project would be eligible for this 25% funding.
And so that is a possibility potentially moving forward, is to have more of those types or these types of projects.
That is a possibility, but this first plant, just going through this experience of getting it, it's going to be a 20-year design, build, operate, maintain contract for under a public-private partnership to produce this 1.7 million gallons a day. It is not an easy process because with seawater desalination, you can take the salt water. In this case, we're using a saltwater well that's drilled very deep, and taking the clean salt water and then desalinating it. But then you're ending up with the salts. And how do you deal with the salts or the brine environment in an environmentally friendly way that doesn't create problems for the coastal waters? So it is a challenging project, but our timeline is fairly rapid. Or we're looking at getting this plant online and producing water around the early part of 2025.
When you were on in the past, one of the things that was really striking that you had said was that the Navy doesn't always do what they say they're going to do, and kind of indicating that they weren't the most trustworthy partner in this process based on your experiencing with them in the past. When Ryan asked about that report that you were due and have still not received, and then talking about some of the other transparency issues, it feels like the Pentagon says they're going to do the right thing, but in practice, not getting the report, not being part of the process when it comes to investigating what went wrong. Tell us a little bit about where that relationship between your agency and that agency stands right now. Do you think that they are a trustworthy partner moving forward?
I've responded to this question before with this answer. Trust is earned, and to me, it's earned by actions. They speak much louder than words on a piece of paper or words spoken out, verbally. It's the follow through, it's the action. So we want to work with the Navy. We understand they have a very important role in protecting our freedoms, but we also need them to demonstrate through their actions that they are responsible partners to take care of the Aina, to protect the Vai, to preserve it for future generations. They need to take it and to demonstrate that by their actions, and emptying out those fuel tanks as soon as it's safely possible. I think is in one step in trying to remove the danger of further contamination of our precious Vai in those aquifers.
Our time is almost up, but we did want to allow you some moments here at the end to just have your final message out to the viewers out there. Again, as you call for a reduction in overall water usage, what is your message this morning to those who may be watching?
To everybody watching, I know that we can do this together. There's a lot of good people. There are good people in our community. There are people that are responsible, that understand the importance of water for life. That together we can do it by conserving water. It won't be easy, but I ask everybody to look at creative ways to save water around your home or your business. Personally, I'm trying to get to that 5-minute shower or less. Not quite there, but I'm trying to get there. But everybody can do something and be personally responsible to help in the situation.
Okay. Chief Engineer of the Board of Water Supply, Ernie Lau, thank you as always for coming on. We look forward to speaking with you again soon.
Mahalo.
Thanks so much.
Aloha.
Well, good to hear from him and getting an update on where we're at with this entire crisis. As you heard, he kind of laid out the timeline of what the Navy and the Pentagon is saying, that they will move forward on this defueling of the Red Hill facility. Of course, it'll take a few months to put that plan together and then another 12 months actually to activate it. The Board of Water Supply has not been consulted through this process thus far about what maybe are some of the safest measurements or the safest actions to do moving forward. But they did say that they are hopeful that that plan will be shared with them and they can provide their insights moving forward as this process goes through. And this actual hopefully action is taken, as you heard towards the end there, Ernie Lau speaking about, words are one thing, action is another, and he's hoping that this will finally happen on an issue that he's been sounding the alarm on for quite some time now.
Yeah, very clear his words there. Trust is earned, and they are still in the process of earning it. In the meantime, even if draining the tanks and decommissioning that facility goes 100% smoothly, we still have the very real consequences of having those 3 wells shut down. They're exploring other wells. But 20% of the water is offline, and in some areas, 50% of the water is not there. 17.5 million gallons a day now not being pumped into our water system, made available to urban Honolulu. How do we make that up? We're looking at a variety of issues. There could be rate increases. There could be, more calls, of course, to reduce water, and there could be limits on construction, which is something that I know a lot of developers are watching and a lot of people are talking about, because that is up against, of course, expanding the economy and building affordable housing and other housing that is so vital to our economy as well. So there's a lot of issues that he covered in this. If you didn't have a chance to catch from the beginning, please do go back, watch When This Is POW, or can always catch it as a podcast. But really great to hear from him about all the work they're doing. He did say that they're going before the board today to talk about, a rate study and also potential consequences. They're going to see how they get through the summer about what we could look at in terms of construction and the impacts that this could have there.
Yeah, and you just hear from him overall. This is not something that is going to be solved within a few months or even a few years. This is going to be a long process as they continue to look for new sources of water and examining just the impact that these facilities and the loss of these 3 sources will have to the overall supply here on Oahu. And so we'll continue to follow this as this will be an issue for some time that residents here on Oahu are having to face. On Wednesday, we're going to be jumping island and heading over to Kauai.
That's right. We're heading over to the Garden Isle to talk to Mayor Derek Kawakami. He has talked about in the past having some of the strictest COVID-19 restrictions in the state. Kauai was shut down in some times when other islands were not. But in his State of the County address, he did say that he believes the worst of the pandemic is behind us. We want to get an update from his community about how they're doing and how they're recovering economically and otherwise. Also, they have a lot of infrastructure issues as well. We've talked about that in the past, and I'm sure we'll touch on that again on Wednesday.
We look forward to that conversation and hope you'll join us for another episode of Spotlight Hawaii right here on the platforms of the Honolulu Star-Advertiser. Take care. Aloha.
Aloha.
This episode of Spotlight Hawaii is brought to you by Long's Drugs.